Welcome to video lesson 8.1. It's going to be a new section of multiplying monomials. Go ahead and put today's date in the top corner. And the first thing we have is our I can statement. It says I can identify monomials, multiply, and raise monomials to a power. So we need to first look at what is a monomial, if that's what we're looking at. So monomial is an expression that is a number, a variable, or the product of a number and variable. So it can be just a number, just a variable, or the product of both. So remember, the product means you're going to multiply. So it's multiplying a number and a variable, and that's shown by writing them side by side. Next, we're going to look at what are good examples of monomials and what are not monomials. So the first thing we have is the examples that are monomials. And we have the first one is 5b because it's a number and a variable side by side, meaning they're being multiplied, so it's the product. Our next one is negative w. Remember, there's a 1 there too, so it's negative 1 and w side by side, meaning they're being multiplied. And also, if you leave off the 1, you can have just a negative variable. We have 23, because it's allowed to be just a number. X squared, because we're allowed to be a variable with any exponent. And our last one, 1/3, x to the third, y to the fourth. And that's because 1/3 and x cubed and y to the fourth are all side by side, meaning they're being multiplied. Now for the not examples. Our first one is 1 over n to the fourth. We cannot have a variable on the bottom and just a fraction. Our next one is the cube root of x. You can't take cube roots or square roots. Once again, the only thing we're allowed to do is multiply. X plus 8, because that plus sign, once again, we can only multiply, so they can only be written side by side. And our last one, a to the negative first power. We can't have any negative powers. Now we just need to refresh and go over some terms, make sure we all remember them. And that the first one is a constant. And a constant's a monomial that's just a real number. It's a lone number by itself. So up here in our examples, it would just be a 23. That would be considered a constant because it's just a number, no variable, it's not going to change. Our next one's coefficient. And coefficient is the number in front of the variables. And our last one is power. And power is just your exponent. And I kind of refreshed our memory. X is our base because he's the big number. N is our power because he's the little one. And to just still refreshing our memories about what powers are, if I have 2 to the third power, that means it's 2 times 2 times 2. So 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8. Now, before we begin multiplying monomials, we have to learn the rules. So, multiplying monomials. Our first step is to multiply the coefficients or constants and add exponents of same bases. Now, on the second one, usually your base is a variable. Not always. Sometimes it can be a number, but usually for us it will be a variable. So add your exponents of your same variables. So let's see an example of how to multiply monomials. Example 1. We have 5x to the 7th, x to the 6th. Alright, and first thing we want to do is multiply our coefficients. So I have a 5 in front in this one. And technically there's a 1 here in front of this x, so it could be 5 times 1. Alright, and then we're going to look at our x's. I have x to the 7th, so it's all side by side, so it's all being multiplied, times x to the 7th, and an x to the 6th, so times x to the 6th. So we're going to multiply coefficients, so 5 times 1 is 5. Then we're going to drop down our base of x side by side of it, and then with our variables, exponents, we're going to add them. So 7 plus 6 is 13. There we go. So there's our first example. Let's see one more. Example 2. We have 4a b to the 6th times a negative 7 a squared b to the 3rd. Now, first step, multiply coefficients. So we have 4 times a negative 7 times, and then we have our variables. So I have an a here, and it's just an a by itself, so that means it's technically a to the first power because there's one of them. Times, and then I look for another a squared. And then I have a b to the 6th and a b to the 3rd. So now we're going to come through here, multiply our coefficients. 4 times negative 7 is negative 28. Drop down our base of a, and then add our variables exponents on the same base. So a and a, so it's 1 plus 2 gives us 3. Drop down our base of b and add its exponents. So 6 plus 3 is 9. So those are our rules for multiplying monomials. We multiply the coefficients. 4 times negative 7 is negative 28. We add our exponents of the same variable. So a to the 1st and a squared gives us a cubed. B to the 6th, b to the 3rd gives us b to the 9th. Now let's look at raising monomials to a power. So that means like a power and then another exponent. So we distribute the power to the whole monomial, everything inside of it. Then we raise the coefficient to the power. Then we multiply the exponents of the bases, and once again of your variables, and the power. So let's see an example of raising monomials to a power. So our first example here has a bracket and then a parenthesis 3 squared 3 squared. Now once again, we want to first look at what's on the inside of here. So I have 3 squared. So that means our base is 3 this time. I don't have any variables. Alright, and then he has a power. So a power that's being raised to a power, they get multiplied. So it's going to be 3, and then the exponent of 2 times 3. And then I can't forget that 2 on the outside there. He has to drop down. So then 2 times 3 is 6. So it's going to be 3 to the 6th power. And once again, that 2 has to drop. I haven't used him yet. And once again, we have a power being raised to another power, so we multiply them. So it's going to be 3, and then 6 times 2 is 12. Now you can stop there with the answer, or you can go ahead and see what 3 to the 12th is. And 3 to the 12th is 531,441. And both these answers are correct. 3 to the 12th, or if you expand it, 531,441. Now off to our second example of our raising monomials to a power. Alright, so we're given negative 5x squared y, and it's all being cubed. It's all to the 3rd power. So your first step is to distribute. So negative 5 to the third power. So we raise our coefficient to that power. Then we multiply our exponent. So I keep my base of 2, and its power is going to be 2 times 3. Now I drop down my y, and technically I have one y here, so this could be 1 and then 1 times 3. Alright, now we want to find what this is. So negative 5 to the third power is negative 125. We drop down our x for the base, and we say 2 times 3 is 6. And then we drop down our y base, and we say 1 times 3 is 3. And there we have it. The big thing to remember on this one is that that's negative 5 to the third power. So it's negative 5 times negative 5 times negative 5. So remember to raise that coefficient to the power and then multiply your exponents. So here's our last example. And what it does is it has multiple parts. I have to use the order of operation because I have 2 parentheses, so that means I have 2 monomials here, and they're all being raised to a power. So in order of operations, I have to worry about my exponents before I can worry about multiplying. So our first step is to distribute our exponent. So I'm going to drop down my parenthesis because they're still side by side, meaning they're being multiplied. So I have to keep my parenthesis for now. And say negative 2 to the fourth power. And then I drop down my variable x, and then when we're raising to a power, we multiply, so it's going to be 2 times 4. And I drop down my y and say 3 times 4. And then we're going to do the same thing over here. We're going to distribute our power. So it's 1/2 to the third power. And it's that whole fraction. So sometimes I put it in other parentheses to show us the whole fraction being cubed. Now I drop down my x, and remember that's technically x for the first, so 1 times 3 is going to give us his new power for his exponent. So now we're going to simplify. Negative 2 to the fourth power. So remember that's negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. That's going to give us a positive 16. Any negative raised to an even power will end up being positive. Alright, then I'm going to drop down my x and say 2 times 4 is 8. And I'm going to drop down my y and say 3 times 4 is 12. Now, raise 1/2 to the third power, so that's 1 to the third power. So that's 1 over, then 2 to the third power, which is 8. Now I drop down my x and say 1 times 3 is 3. Okay, so even though I've distributed my power, there's still multiplication left to do. So multiply these monomials, we multiply our coefficients. So 16 times 1/8 times, alright, then my first variable I have here is x to the 8th. Then I have an x to the 3rd. And then y to the 12th drops down, but he doesn't have anybody to go with, so he's just going to be by himself. Now, just to simplify it out, 16 times 1/8 is 2. I'm going to drop down my base of x and say we're multiplying these, so we add our exponents. So 8 plus 3 is 11. And y to the 12th has nobody to go with, so he just drops down. And that concludes us for solving for simplifying monomials by multiplying and raising them to a power. Thank you.